expect. Now, the question that I pose to the Commission is, having heard testimony so far and hearing this list of mechanisms in place to prevent corruption, it seems to me that there is a disjuncture between what is on paper and the impact that we see in the real world. And we can get to that further, Matthew.
Thanks. That is obviously what we're going to spend most of our time on. But before we do that, maybe if we can take that ministerial answer and which you quote at the foot of page 7. There was one point that struck me about it. I mean, the answer talks about a range of detection measures, including lifestyle reviews, conducted through SAPS's analysis of a number of integrity control measures, such as financial disclosures, gift management protocols, performance of remunerative work outside SAPS. That determines red flags. And then anomalies which are detected are referred for further lifestyle investigations, and when necessary, forensic auditors are engaged for lifestyle audits. Do you know how many lifestyle audits have been done in the last 5 years?
My understanding is that no lifestyle audits have been conducted within SAPS as of yet. There is a later parliamentary question that I believe came out, I think it was last week, where the acting Minister of Police indicated that they were still in discussions with the SIU to second officials to SAPS to do these lifestyle audits for them.
Watch closely, because this is where the whole illusion cracks. On paper, the South African Police Service has everything: ethics workshops, financial disclosures, gift protocols, polygraph tests, the full arsenal against corruption. It looks bulletproof. And then the World Bank's expert turns to the Commission and quietly drops the question that detonates it all. How many lifestyle audits have actually been done in the last 5 years? The answer: none. Not one. Zero. Every mechanism exists, and none of them has ever fired. What you just watched is the gap between a system that performs integrity and a system that delivers it. They wrote the rules, printed the forms, ticked every box, and never once pulled the trigger on the people at the top. And here's my honest verdict: a control that is never used isn't a control at all. It's theater. It's a costume. And the men this was supposed to catch have been walking straight through it for years. This is only the first crack, and trust me, it gets so much worse. Because next, you'll see the numbers behind that failure, and they are almost impossible to believe. If you want to watch this system get taken apart piece by piece, hit subscribe and like right now. You do not want to miss what this witness reveals next.
I think one of the things that we haven't discussed in depth in terms of the response is that within SAPS, every year there have been these lifestyle reviews conducted. And some of them have led, in very few cases, to lifestyle investigations. In each case, they have been cleared. And I think this is an important part of the story to tell, that these are being conducted at the lifestyle review investigation process, but not necessarily turning up any results. And so I say on page 9, at paragraph 9.2, between financial year 2021-2022 and 23-24, no SAPS officials were referred for lifestyle investigation. In 24-25, 5 of 823 SMS members underwent lifestyle investigations, and all were cleared.
Now here come the numbers, and I need you to really sit with these. Between 2021 and 2024, the number of senior police officials referred for a lifestyle investigation was exactly 0. Then in the 2024/25 year, finally, 5 people out of 823 were investigated. 5, and every single one of them was cleared. What you just watched is not a system catching criminals. It's a system producing clean bills of health. 823 of the most senior members of the police service, an organization this very commission is examining for organized crime infiltration, and the machinery designed to flag them turned up almost nobody, then cleared the handful it did. Let me be blunt. When a detection system finds nothing, there are only two possibilities. Either there is genuinely nothing to find, or the system is blind. And given everything this commission has already heard, which of those two do you honestly believe? These aren't just statistics on a page. They are the sound of a safety net with no net in it. And once you understand why it catches nothing, you'll see the single most damning design flaw of them all. Coming up next.
Apparently, largely ineffective.
Can I just clarify, because it is a point that you've made, but it seems to me to be a particularly important point, which is that whether they're conducted by private auditors or by SIU auditors seconded to SAPS, the persons conducting lifestyle audits have no statutory powers to collect information from financial institutions. So they depend entirely on information that is voluntarily provided by the person they are auditing.
That is my understanding, that's correct.
And at the moment, the system only reaches this lifestyle auditing stage after it's gone through, after a red flag has been triggered below it. There's no system of random auditing that takes place.
So the expectation with the escalating audit or lifestyle review process is that you start from the baseline of the initial review to turn up red flag.
And here it is, the flaw that explains everything. Listen to what the advocate forces into the record. The people conducting these lifestyle audits, whether private auditors or investigators seconded from the SIU, have no statutory power to pull information from the banks. None. So what do they rely on? Whatever the person being investigated chooses to hand over. Read that again. The suspect decides what evidence the investigator gets to see. What you just watched is the entire integrity system confessing that it politely asks the fox for a tour of the henhouse. Somebody with something to hide simply leaves the incriminating account out of the pile. And the audit sees exactly what they wanted to see. And it gets worse. There's no random auditing either. Nothing kicks in until a red flag has already been raised, by a system we've just watched raise almost none. So the clever ones are never checked, and the ones who are checked control the evidence. My verdict? This isn't a loophole. This is the whole design. A watchdog with no teeth, no reach, and no element of surprise. And if you think that's damning, wait until you hear what the police think of themselves. In their own words, in their own survey. That's next.
I'll start in the middle. That it says the latest SAPS survey conducted in 22-23 found that only 24.4% of SAPS officials agreed that the police conduct themselves professionally, while 31.6% agreed that the police do not abuse their power. And so the point that I want to make here is by SAPS's own internal surveys, the way most people see their own organizational culture is that they don't see it as an institution with great integrity, that they recognize that their colleagues do not behave the way that they should. In many cases, they understand that misconduct is rife. And so when we compare this to some of the initiatives mentioned in terms of advocacy programs, in terms of campaigns, in terms of statements to say that we do not tolerate corruption, it's very difficult to imagine how a message like that cuts through when people's everyday lived experience is their colleagues engaging in misbehavior. And so to turn around an organizational...
This next one comes straight from the police service's own internal survey, so nobody can call it an outside attack. When SAPS asked its own members whether the police conduct themselves professionally, only 24% agreed. Barely 1 in 3 believe their colleagues don't abuse their power. Let that land. This is not activists talking. This is not the media. This is the police describing the police. What you just watched is an organization quietly admitting that its own people don't trust its own culture. And the expert's point is devastating. You cannot fix that with posters and workshops and speeches about integrity. When your lived daily experience is watching colleagues cross the line, a banner in the canteen saying, "We don't tolerate corruption" is worse than useless. It's insulting. My take. Culture doesn't change because someone gives a nice speech. It changes when the rules finally have consequences. And right now, this survey is the sound of the honest officers realizing nobody is coming to back them up, which raises the question that should chill you. What actually happens to the good cop, the one who refuses to play along? The answer is coming, and it's bleaker than you'd think.
Which really speak to why that's necessary.
Sure. So 11.1 says, where corruption is embedded in institutional culture, ethical appeals tend to fall flat because the system itself rewards corrupt behavior and punishes those who resist it. The next paragraph, an individual with strong personal ethics operating inside a structurally corrupt system is largely powerless, lacking the necessary institutional framework to support ethical behavior and facing continued pressure to turn a blind eye to misconduct. Both the Zondo Commission and evidence before the Madlanga Commission provide such examples of ethical officials under huge pressure and constant harassment from colleagues engaging in misconduct.
This is the part that got quiet in the room, and it should. The expert reads it straight from his report. Where corruption is baked into the culture, ethical appeals fall flat, because the system itself rewards the corrupt and punishes those who resist. An honest official inside a rotten structure is, in his words, largely powerless, facing constant pressure, constant harassment, told every single day to look the other way. What you just watched is the quiet tragedy underneath every corruption scandal, the good people who tried and got crushed for it. We love to ask why nobody spoke up. This is why. Because in a captured system, speaking up doesn't make you a hero, it makes you a target. And both the Zondo Commission and this one have living examples of exactly that. Here's my blunt verdict. Individual courage is not a strategy. You cannot build clean government on the hope that lone brave people will outsuffer an entire corrupt machine. You have to change the machine. And that brings us to the mechanics of how the dirty money actually hides in plain sight. The shockingly simple trick that makes a millionaire look like a modest civil servant. You need to see this next.
Can you highlight that?
Sure. So the current form and disclosure requirements only apply to the individual, whether that's a public servant, elected official, etc. In each of these cases, it is only you as a person. We know that this, from international experience, we know that this is not sufficient. One of the easiest ways of concealing your financial interests and wealth is to place these same companies in the name of your immediate family members. And so it doesn't really take that much to hide these assets in the current framework. It doesn't require a whole lot of sophistication even to put a company in your wife's name that might be doing business with the state, or in the name of your children, to put a car or a piece of property that you've been given as a gift to rather register that in somebody else's name. And part of the
Now watch how absurdly easy the trick is. The current disclosure form only asks about you, just you, and the expert lays out the con in one breath. The easiest way on earth to hide your wealth is to park it in your family's name. Put the company in your wife's name. Register the car to your children. Put the property just far enough from yourself. And here's the kicker. You'd still be following the rules, completely, perfectly compliant. What you just watched is a lock with the key taped to the door. It doesn't take a criminal mastermind. It doesn't take offshore lawyers. It takes a spouse and a signature. And because the state never asks about the family, it never sees the empire hiding one name away. My verdict? A disclosure form that stops at your own name isn't a disclosure form. It's a suggestion. and every serious player in the world knows it. This is one of the two biggest gaps that global corruption runs through, and the second one is even slicker. But before we get there, the chairman himself is about to walk this witness into a scenario so vivid, so specific, it stops being theory and becomes a face you'll recognize. Don't look away.
Practically.
Dr.
Then-
Silman, how do these forms treat, it's a modern phenomenon where something is neither an asset nor a loan in the true sense, but a public official has the right of use of an asset, either a house or a car, that belongs to somebody else. How do the forms treat that? Because it's not a loan to you, it's not an asset registered in your name, it belongs to a shady third party who purchases it
Sure.
in their own name, but you have access and right to use it as and when you please. Do the forms deal with that, and how do they deal with it?
So it's an excellent question, and this relates to our definition of beneficial ownership. So it's not just about ownership, but as you say, about beneficial use and making that clear. And so the way to approach this in your form, and this is much simpler in an electronic format, but for each asset that you declare, that you state, this is an asset that I own under my name individually, or that I have beneficial use of, I have beneficial control, or I have joint ownership maybe with my spouse, etc. And so this deals with that issue of beneficial use. And so with something like this, you'd have to very clearly establish what the requirements are. And this is why good guidance is important, why you need advisory services to advise people on how to prepare their forms, so that they can ensure that they're preparing the forms correctly. But it's a fantastic example of why it's important to ensure that these requirements are as broad as possible, so that people can fill out all kinds of interesting situations that they might find themselves in, to ensure that we have a full picture of their circumstances, of their interests.
Because I can imagine a situation where a senior general in the SAPS drives a 3 million rand car, and then when it comes time to disclose, he says, well, it's not mine, so I don't have to disclose it. And there's nothing the SAPS can do about it, because it's really not his car, it's his friend's car or somebody else's car, although it parks in his garage every day and he uses it every day.
That's exactly it. And I think that's a great example of why this current gap in requiring disclosure of beneficial ownership or beneficial interest is such an important one, because that official can entirely declare that they own 0 cars and they would be following the rules. There is nothing we can do about them, and it would be correct. But we know that there is another reality, there's a factual experience on the ground that differs from what is required.
This is the moment the whole abstract argument grabs you by the collar. The chairman doesn't talk in theory. He builds a picture. Picture a senior general who drives a 3 million rand car. It parks in his garage every night. He uses it every day, and when disclosure time comes, he simply says, "It's not mine. It belongs to a friend, a shady third party who bought it in their own name, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, the system can do." The expert agrees without hesitation that official can declare he owns 0 cars, and he'd be telling the truth by the letter of the rules. What you just watched is a judge and a World Bank expert calmly agreeing that the emperor can wear his crimes in broad daylight and the law will hand him a certificate of good conduct. The car is real, the use is real, only the ownership is fiction, and fiction is all it takes. My verdict? When a rule can be beaten by a favor between friends, the rule was never protecting anyone, it was protecting them. This is the beating heart of the whole problem, laid bare in one unforgettable example. And later a commissioner is going to ask the question everyone's thinking: what if the people we put in charge of catching this are corrupt too? Stay with me.
To determine what kind of additional investigations are needed.
Although centralizing would probably be much better, but I already foresee the possibility of those coming from the central point being bribed by those who are being investigated or on whom the audits are being performed, with the result that nothing will happen, at least in respect of some individuals. That cannot apply to everybody across the board.
I think it's a perfectly fair comment, and I think it speaks to some of the debates that we often have in the South African context around what anti-corruption architecture should look like. Is it one central agency? Is it a number of different agencies? And I think generally recognizing the history of state capture, I think that there is, in many cases, there is acknowledgement that there is that risk, and that a more diffuse model makes sense, but it's a more diffuse model where you have we still have clear responsibilities to say that this is the entity that does investigations and prosecutions. With the corruption prevention mandate, it doesn't necessarily have to go into that same entity that does investigations and prosecutions, but at least keeping all of your preventative functions within one dedicated entity, I think has a lot of benefits in terms of a lot of the issues that we've mentioned so far. And the one issue that I haven't talked about is the effect on oversight. If we have to oversee the efficacy of this framework across all of these departments and ministries, it's extraordinarily difficult. If we have a single entity that can report on the performance against these metrics, we have a much clearer line of sight of what's happening. We know who to hold accountable. And in terms of your question on capture and bribery, these are things that can be insulated against, right? That we have certain integrity measures that are applied to people to ensure when we're recruiting people to a dedicated agency that we have vetted them. We ensure that the head of this authority has sufficient independence, etc. And so I think those concerns around bribery, etc., it's equally applicable to any corruption function, right?
And I should not be understood to be saying this should not necessarily be a solution, not at all. Surely we must come up with solutions. We cannot throw our hands up. We're just raising it as a possibility. And I'm by no means saying, we can't go there, not at all.
And I think it's to reflect on that, I think it's a good point that there are lots of different models that can work. But what I think we have to recognize is that the current model is not working, and that something needs to change.
Now the tension in the room turns personal and honest. A commissioner says the quiet part out loud. Fine, he says, build your central anti-corruption agency. But what stops the people at the top of that agency from simply being bribed too? What stops one phone call from making the whole thing disappear for the right individuals? And credit to the expert, he doesn't flinch, he doesn't spin. He calls it a perfectly fair comment. He admits it. Corruption inheres wherever human beings are. What you just watched is the rarest thing at a hearing like this. Nobody pretending they found a magic bullet. And yet the witness holds his line, and it's the line that matters most. Insulate it, vet the leadership, guarantee independence, keep clear accountability, and above all, recognize this. The current model is not working. Something has to change. Here's my verdict. That exchanges the whole commission in 90 seconds. Not naive hope, not despair, just the hard adult admission that doing nothing is the one option that guarantees failure. You can debate the design forever. You cannot debate that the status quo is broken. And speaking of broken, you'll wait until you see what actually happens to the officials who do get caught. The number is almost insulting. It's next.
30.1 and 30.2.
Let me read 31. It says, sanctions range from verbal warnings, written warnings, suspension without pay, or referral for disciplinary steps. Only a single dismissal has thus far been reported in the public service over the last 2 years.
So can I just clarify what you're saying there, that in relation to disclosure issues, false disclosures on the form, refusal to disclose, failure to disclose, there has literally across the entire public service only been one dismissal in the last 2 years.
That's correct. But I would like to extend that to say that this also includes your lifestyle reviews, your lifestyle investigations.
So even when you've been disclosed, you've been caught out through a lifestyle audit across the entire public service, one dismissal over the last 2 years.
That's as reported by the Department of Public Service and Administration.
Brace yourself, because this single number might be the most damning thing in the entire day. Across the whole of South Africa's public service, every department, every province, over 2 full years, how many people were dismissed over disclosure failures and lifestyle findings combined? 1. A single dismissal. And the advocate makes the witness say it plainly. False disclosures, refusals to disclose, failures to disclose, people caught out by lifestyle reviews, all of it, everywhere, and the grand total of consequences is one person losing their job. What you just watched is the closing of a loop that was never closed. You can have the best forms in the world, the sharpest audits, and it means nothing if the punishment for getting caught is functionally nothing. My verdict is simple and brutal. A system that catches almost no one and then fires almost no one it catches is not a deterrent. It's a permission slip. Every official watching learns the same lesson. The worst case is a paperwork process and a shrug. So why would anyone ever tell the truth? But here's the twist. The commission isn't just diagnosing the disease. Next, the chairman starts designing the cure live on the record. And it could change everything.
Unlawful activity. There are other jurisdictions that have created an add-on which is based on what are called unexplained wealth orders, where an authority can issue an instruction or an order for you to explain wealth that can't necessarily be directly linked to criminal activity, but can't be explained with reference to legitimate income. And then those regimes make provision for forfeiture in the absence of a reasonable explanation. It seems to me that in this context, a legislative amendment along those lines may well make a lot of sense, because if someone can legitimately explain the origins of their wealth, in circumstances where, well, you have the disclosure history, which you can point to and which might found good cause to issue an unexplained wealth order. If someone can explain the wealth, they may have a separate problem explaining why they didn't disclose it, but if they can explain a legitimate source for it, then it won't be forfeited. But if they can't, then it would be, and that would be a huge, a very powerful sanction in this context. I'm not the expert, I'm not the witness, but these are my views, and I'd be interested in your response.
But I think you're exactly right. I think what you've just described, this is what I mean by a non-conviction-based confiscation, that you would use the same kind of principles, just as you've articulated. It might just be a different kind of wording to talk about unexplained wealth order, but effectively, as you say, this is something that you could measure against what has been disclosed. If they can't explain something, they can be punished on that basis.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be punished. It would be the confiscation of wealth that can.
Now watch the room shift from autopsy to blueprint. The chairman stops asking questions and starts building a weapon. He points to something used in other countries, the unexplained wealth order. The idea is ruthless in its simplicity. An authority can look at wealth that can't be tied to a specific crime and can't be explained by an honest salary either, and demand, explain this, explain where it came from. And if you can't, you forfeit it. No conviction required, no years-long trial, just account for it or lose it. And the expert lights up because this is exactly what he means by non-conviction-based confiscation. The disclosure form becomes your first line of evidence. Lie on it, hide behind it, and the state doesn't have to prove the underlying crime. Only that you can't explain the money. What you just watched is the first genuinely dangerous idea for the corrupt in this whole hearing. Everything before this they could game. This they cannot. My verdict? Flip the burden, and you flip the game. Suddenly the man with the mystery mansion has to do the sweating. That is how you make disclosure bite. And then, in his final words to the commission, this witness delivers the verdict that ties it all together. You won't want to miss it.
What would your last word be to this commission? It can be more than one word.
It's a big question. I think so. I think a lot of the recommendations we've already discussed in pointing out some of the weaknesses of the current approach. I think the main message I wanted to drive home is that a lot of the fragmentation and weaknesses that we see in the current framework are a result of incremental attempts to improve the system. If we use the example of the SIU trying to fill in this gap to conduct lifestyle audits through secondment arrangements, this is an interim measure. I think the use of the Public Service Commission as a verifying agency is also one of these examples of a somewhat interim measure. And so I think the system in its current form has reached the limit of incremental improvements and has reached a point where you need the more substantive overhaul of how these functions are dispersed, of what the mandate looks like, what kind of powers are needed. And this is, I think, where it feels to me that the only conclusion, looking at the deficiencies and gaps in the current system, the only conclusion is a substantive overhaul that involves some kind of a dedicated corruption prevention agency. Whether that is the model proposed by NACAC that builds on the SIU is open to debate. I think people can have views on what the optimal model is. I think they have some great suggestions, but I think that there's more detail around the particular functions that still needs to be refined to understand how to overhaul the system so that you have a more cohesive institutional framework. And so that's I think the kind of closing point that I'd want to drive home, that incremental improvements is just not going to be enough. This is really a major overhaul that's needed. Thank you.
And here it is, the last word. Asked for his single most important message, the expert doesn't hedge. He says the failures we've watched all day aren't random. They're the wreckage of years of small fixes bolted onto a broken frame. The SIU secondments, a patch. The Public Service Commission doing the verifying, a patch. Patch on patch on patch until the whole thing is held together by tape. And his conclusion is unflinching. Incremental improvement has hit its limit. Tinkering is finished. What South Africa needs is a substantive overhaul, a dedicated corruption prevention agency with real powers, real reach, real accountability. What you just watched is a World Bank expert telling a commission of inquiry to its face that the current model cannot be saved, only replaced. And my final verdict? He's right. You cannot polish your way out of a system designed to see nothing, catch no one, and punish almost no one. Everything today pointed to the same door. The only question left is whether anyone will walk through it. That's the story. A police integrity system that looks flawless on paper and stops nobody in reality. If this opened your eyes, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because I'm following this commission to the very end and you deserve to see how it finishes.